but also a couple of other recent projects. It's great to have Oystercatcher on the road again, and I can announce that we have another pamphlet coming up in the next couple of months, which is by Nick Totten. Wonderful to see him writing again, and that is being typeset as we speak, almost. Right, now I'm going to hand over to Zoe, who's very kindly agreed to introduce the readers tonight. Over to Zoe.
Hi, hello everybody. And yeah, so first of all, we have Ellen Dillon, who's a writer and teacher from Limerick in Ireland. And she's written the chapbooks Heave, Smithereens Press, 2018, Sonnets to Malkmus, Sad Press, 2019, Excavate, Poems After Pasolini, 2020, Oystercatcher, and Achatina, forthcoming Sound Eye Press. Her book of poems in French and English, Morsel May Sleep, is forthcoming from Sublunary Editions in June. And she'll be reading poems from her Oystercatcher pamphlet Excavate, an excerpt from an ongoing documentary poem called Butter Intervention, and some prose poems from her forthcoming book Morsel May Sleep. So very warm welcome to Ellen Dillon.
Yay!
Thank you very much, Zoe, and thank you, Peter, for asking me, and Ian, and it's lovely to see all of you on a Saturday night. So I'm going to start with, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm going to start with a couple of poems from my Oystercatcher pamphlet, Excavate, Poems After Pasolini. So this pamphlet started as attempts to translate some of Pasolini's poems from Leggenda di Gramsci when I was a postgrad and failing miserably, and then coming back to them years later and trying to make something else out of them by stringing them together with other texts. So the first pieces that I'm going to read are both excerpts from Pasolini's poem La Terra di Lavoro. Okay, so the first one is called Workland, and it's after Pasolini and Slint, and then the second part is called Workland Song, and it's after Pasolini and REM. So, let me in, the voice cried softly from outside. It's close by now, Workland, a few herds of buffalo, a few heaps of houses among tomato plants, lost in the doorstep of the empty house, ivy and poor planks. Once in a while, a stream a hair's breadth from the land appears between branches of elms, weighed down with vines, black as the clap. Inside in the train, running half empty, the autumn freeze veils. Please, it's cold. When he woke, the sad wood, the wet rags. If outside is heaven, here inside is the kingdom of the dead. Help me, he whispered. Passed on from pain to pain, without ever suspecting, on the benches, in the corridors. Here they are, chins on their chests, shoulders against backrests, mouths on a piece of greased bread. His breath was still. Slowly he turned, chewing badly, wretched and dark, like dogs on a bite of stolen food, and rising in them, if you look in their eyes, at their hands or their cheekbones, a pitiful blushing in which soul finds itself to be enemy. His face was flush and timid. But even whoever's not eating or telling a neighbour his story, if you look at him, looks back with his heart in his eyes, almost in fright, to tell you he's done nothing wrong, that he's innocent. Silently, he pulled down the shade against the shadow. A young woman from Fondi or Aversa cradles a creature, dreaming, a little lamb's life. She'll play with him if he wakes from his sleep, babbling words like the brave new world, settling him with words as old as the world, behind the edge of the windowsill. If you look at her, you'll see her not moving, like an animal pretending to be dead. She hugs herself inside her poor clothes, and staring into nothing, she listens to the voice that reminds her every minute of her poverty, like it's a crime. Let me in, the voice cried softly. Workland Song. What we want and what we need. All of a sudden, every light inside, every act has been confused. been confused, of consciousness seems yesterday's thing. Today it is enemy to that woman rocking her creature, to those black peasants, lost lamb off the precipice into who know nothing about it, the one who dies so his freedom may be saved in other mothers, in other creatures, is their enemy. The one who dies so his bastard thirst for justice may burn on in other servants, in other peasants. You are following this time, is their enemy. Whoever rips up the flag already red with murders is their enemy, wrecking all things virtuous and true. And so is the faithful one, defending the red flag from white assassins. The boss who hopes for surrender, these bastards stole their power, is their enemy. And the companion pretending to fight with a faith that's already negation of faith. It's their enemy who gives. If they weren't there, we would have created them. Thanks to God for the reaction of the new people, and their enemy who pardons the blood in the name of the new people. So it is given back in a day of blood, the world to a time that seemed finished. Downhill slide into abysmal. The light that rains on these souls is still the light of the old South. The soul of that land is old mud. I didn't do the revolution. If you measure disappointment in the world, in your heart, you feel it leading to old passion, not new blankness. I'm talking here to me alone. And you lose yourself in that light that's raising with the sudden rain, clumps of red sage, filthy houses. I listen to the finest work song. You lose yourself in the old heaven out here on the lava crests that's giving a heavenly, if human, face. I'm talking here to me alone, to the horizon where Naples is lost in grey drool, to the southern showers that of an evening invade. I listen to the finest work song, one on the faraway hills of Lazio, the other on this wasteland, on the dirty orchards, the marshes. I'm talking here to me alone, on the village's biggest cities, rain and sunshine mixed together in a joy that might be kept. I listen to the finest work song, like a splinter of that old story, no longer ours, at the bottom of the hearts of these poor travelers. I'm talking here to me alone. You live, only live in the warmth that makes life greater than that story. You lose yourself in the heaven inside. I listen to the finest work song, and even your pity is their enemy. The next thing I'm going to read comes from Butter Intervention. So Butter Intervention is, it started as a couple of poems to keep me occupied during lockdown, and it turned into 1,000 years of the history of Ireland told from the point of view of butter. But I'm not going to read the whole 1,000 years now. I'm just going to read one small excerpt that is centered on a paper given by Oscar Wilde's father once, speculating on what bog butter was and where it came from. Spoilers, the bog. Okay. My favorite story from the enduring mystery of bog butter is from a paper once given by Oscar Wilde's father on Irish food before the potato. In passing, he mentions that the taste of bog butter is similar to that of spermaceti, a hard, white, waxy substance found in the skull cavities of sperm whales. It tickles me beyond measure, imagining Sir William sampling a sliver of 1,000-year-old butter dredged up from the Galtee mountain bogs, and then trying other waxy things to find the closest match in taste and texture. How many fats did he chomp through, I wonder, before settling on this particular cetacean residue? His digression on bog butter emphasizes how little is definitively known about its origins and purpose, but where other scholars meander into speculation about a possible role in rituals or votive offerings, Wilde sticks closely to what he can establish using his own senses. This leads him to note the similarity to tallow and other animal waxes, and to suggest that one purpose of leaving large deposits of butter in the bog might have been to deliberately produce this very transformation, producing wax for lamps and candles. The bodies of Old Croghan Man and Cashel Man, found in the Bog of Allen, show signs of torture and death ritual compatible with human sacrifice. The same bog has yielded a steady trickle of treasures down through the years it's been mined for peat and turf. It's probably natural to want to link the firkins of butter with these stories. To me, and I know I'm in danger of a metaphorical turn of my own here, transforming butter into light is a richer and more compelling alchemy. In the darkest of times, as my continued thriving would come to be catalyst and marker of the collapse of the culture around me, I take solace in the patient science of those who learn to turn me into candle wax. In taste, resembling spermaceti. Butter made rancid by keeping in bogs. Why or wherefore the people put their butter in bogs, I cannot tell. Converted into a hard, yellowish white substance, like old Stilton cheese, and in taste resembling spermaceti, changed into the animal substance denominated adipocere. In 1817, a mass of this bog butter or tallow, weighing about 23 pounds, was discovered in a bog in the Galtee Mountains. Bog butter is always found at a great depth in old, solid bogs. Whether the vessels were originally buried at that depth, whether they were placed near the surface and in lapse of years sunk, or whether the bogs have grown over them, are questions I cannot determine. How many years it would take to produce the remarkable change exhibited by all the specimens which have been discovered is a question of much interest. Two circumstances may have influenced those who buried this butter. It was done either for the purpose of security or in order to produce that very change in it which Petty calls rancid. I hear whale song in my submerged firkin. Maybe I was scuttled under dark water to achieve the taste and texture of a whale wax. I wasn't meant to lie here for 1,000 years, just long enough to harden into tallow to light long winter nights. I would have been hauled up, compact, friable, good for burning, but for my marker lost to bog burst. So there are two more excerpts from that project up on Junction Box currently, if anybody has an appetite for more butter. And the final things that I'm going to read are some sections from my forthcoming book from Sublunary Editions called Morsel May Sleep, which is coming out in June. And this book started with the gift from Peter Manson of a copy of Mallarmé's Thème anglais pour toutes les grammaires, which was a grammar book that he wrote to use proverbs from English as translation exercises at the basis of his grammar lessons for secondary school students. So each of these poems has two poems that take the same proverbs, the French version and English version, and wander off in different directions from that point. So it's a French and English book, and so I'm reading a little bit from both languages, but mostly English. And this is the first time I've ever done a poetry reading that wasn't entirely English, so I'm exceedingly nervous, but hopefully it won't all be terrible. Right. So these ones come from a lesson teaching the correct use of the definite article in English. Definite article, Morsel May Sleep. Same use of the article with a stronger reason when this word designates an object that is the only one of its species. Rises in the morning, the hand, the lip, the morsel may sleep, all fast in their way. Mind is the man, tongue is the rudder, castles in the air, virtue dwells, pearl of the face, hates a long sermon, fill the mouth with empty spoons. Some rise and some are still. We have different mornings, different shapes within the soft rustlings of these warm rooms. Slips twixt cup, lip, sprinkle coffee drops, but morsels don't sleep. Like rust, they're always crumbling. If we fast for too long, there's nothing left for thinking with. No drop left in the tank. If tongues rudder, they're steered by novice hands, and often we're adrift. The mind has its tides, and they take us far out. Our words can only dip in where they can and cleave to a current. Pearlescent foam anoints our being washed up on shore, crowns us with stiff sea meringues, fills our mouths with words like sponge and saline. The aftertaste of silver lingers, a residue of privilege, leaving passwords tinged with bitterness. Se lève le matin, la main, la lèvre, morceau peut glisser, se hâte vers leur but, esprit, c'est l'homme, langue et le gouvernail, château en l'air, vertu réside. La perle du visage est un long sermon, remplir la bouche avec des cuillères vides. La main se lève, la lèvre laisse glisser la cuillère, un vide dans une bouche vide. Rien ne passera plus ses lèvres. Les mots se hâtent vers leur but, c'est-à-dire un jeu, et le monde s'ouvre. Le ciel s'emplit de châteaux jusqu'à l'horizon. Une barque bricolée de sons dérive sur les courants d'air, gouvernée par la langue qui s'ajuste selon les échos et les réverbérations. Rises in the morning, sunny side at least halfway up. May God have mercy on all our souls now, snug in the hollow of the hand, poisoned under the lip, the morsel may sleep, totally oblivious to its coming tumble. We know this should be a slip. Tongues, all fast in their way, slip up and leave us adrift between meanings. They think mind is the man, but we know it is body and tongue is the rudder. Our steering implements are slipping up though, and the navigational instruments need recalibrating. We were headed for castles in the air, where legends tell that virtue dwells, but we lost our way, and ways belonging to several others too. Our disgrace will outlive us. The pearl of the face, the one eye left between us, has rolled right back into a single cranium. This whole body hates a long sermon, so much hot air claiming to fill the mouth with empty spoons. Our hope revels in hollowness and rises. L'espoir se lève le matin dans l'oubli de la journée précédente. La main s'approche de la lèvre, sachant que le morceau peut glisser dans le plus petit creux. Les membres se hâtent vers leur but, réunis sous les ordres sous-entendus de ce chef présomptueux, esprit. C'est l'homme qui se désigne ainsi. On sait pourtant que la langue est le gouvernail et que l'esprit suit ses tournures et ses locutions. On le sait, mais certains membres persistent dans la recherche de châteaux en l'air où on persiste à dire que la vertu réside sans corps, ni haleine, ni but, ni espoir. Elle dort, si une abstraction incorporelle peut faire ça, et la perle du visage reste cachée de nos yeux. Tout comme nous, elle est un long sermon et reste convaincue qu'il est impossible d'emplir la bouche avec des cuillères vides. Elle dort en dehors de l'espoir. Words and no deeds never can fill a sack, only slump glumly alongside an empty one, waiting to be picked up and brandished or bundled. We live on the far side of where the animals are now, so sometimes we must play the fox, vex boatmen with their sacks of grain and poultry, trick gingerbread men, set all at 6s and 7s amongst the doomsday chickens. We've been taught to count our worth in baked goods and dairy. 5 loaves a penny tells us it's a buyer's market, set to make fat wolves of the prowling boyos. Owl thinks her young too good for the mess of hormone and ritual clogging the air in the rooms where we go for schooling, to learn our place and how to move in it. She still thinks they will learn wisdom by the follies of others, fly without falling or failing. But if women conceal all, or conspire to hide the tangling links or chains of stops and starts that string together in learning any single thing, children stand quiet, still, and quite vacant. Dead lice dropped out of their feathered heads once and were just left unremarked and uneaten. If she is right that the devil is in dice, the sin is in the rolling. Every deed seeds 5 other chains of movement, one of stasis. Each word chosen leaves others adrift to clog the air with their 6-legged corpses. Idle people take this so much to heart, it stops them in their tracks. Words just know who is afraid to use them. So the ones who think silk makes the difference between fitting in and falling out will find it is not, in the end, the feeling, but the movement and the reaching that shakes them out of silence, sends them stumbling and shivering to the world's end and beyond. Swarms of paper wasps haunt these roiling plains, copper-coloured live ones come in pudding time to feed on molten sugar and sting us into singing. Thank you very much.
Great, fantastic. Yeah, Thank you.
Ellen, that was great.
Okay. So should I go on and yeah, thank you very much. Really enjoyed that, Alan. And we'll go on straight on to our next reader, Ian Davidson. He's brought up in North Wales, where he lived for much of his adult life. He's a fluent speaker of Welsh. He now lives between a small holding in southwest Mayo in Ireland and Dublin, where he teaches in UCD. He's been publishing poetry since the early 1980s, a number of full-length collections, lately with Shearsman, and many pamphlets. His most recently publications are the Oystercatcher pamphlet being launched here, and a book-length collection by Tiny Twisting Ways, due out from Aquifer in April. He's given readings in Europe and the USA, and his work has been translated into languages. He's also a critic and has published monographs and essays, with his most recent being an extended consideration of the work of Bill Griffiths in the Blackwell Companion to British and Irish Contemporary Poetry, and an essay on Diane de Prima's Revolutionary Letters. He'll be reading from his Oystercatcher pamphlet, from a council house in Connacht, and from other recent work. So welcome, Ian Davidson.
Okay, thank you, Zoe, for that, and thanks to Ellen for that reading. That was great. And also thank you to Peter Hughes for publishing this pamphlet with this work with Oystercatcher, and to Steve Zeri for his work on the pamphlet as well, responsible for the design of it, and I'm delighted with it. So the pamphlet is driven by three concerns. The first of which is an interest in the histories and practices of land ownership and usage in Ireland. The second is the intersections of conservation and social class in small scale and marginal farming. The third is an ongoing and long-standing vision of the landscape as layered, that it's not an aesthetic surface we see or travel on, but is traversed both horizontally and vertically. And the pamphlet describes one way of beginning to read a landscape. It has been variously described as poetry, as a memoir, as a diary, and lately as an essay. It has prose and poetry, and contains histories, geographies, and everyday observations. I'll start with the foreword. The foreword describes a pact that I made with the mountains and the rivers. And then I forgot what the terms of the pact were and what I had promised. In the wind funneled down the valley and fast attacks of rain and desperation, I forged a pact. Between the still mountain, rushing spirit of the river, and white light stained by glass, I gave my heart to the ragged margins of a lake where rushes had still not turned their summer green. Particulars of the pact were between states of mind and unspecified. The mountain was steadfast. The river flushed out bad blood. Water is our friend. The light through the window shattered. It is now payback. I turn dark earth with aching arms. I plaster rough concrete walls of a shed, replace an iron roof, rotten timbers, dig out an oily floor, make it ready for the life to come, the long years turning. Number one. I sit in a council house in Connacht staring out at the Meoree. The green of the Atlantic can just be glimpsed through the neighbours' sheds and a barn on a hill with a rounded iron roof. From the back of the land that surrounds the house, the sky opens out to include a broad expanse of sea between Inishturk and Inishclare. The light is astonishing. The light fills you up, eradicating dark corners. It illuminates, and there is no answer to it. The eye of the sun. When cloud found its way round a mountain, or water thunders underfoot through tunnels of peat, or the eye of the sun is on you. A distant island is a volcano for the time the sun shuts its eye. Lids close slowly. Lashes brush hillsides, featherweight sunbeams, accumulations of cloud. Number 6. In the surrounding countryside, the remains of dance halls. He gestures to a building, now a ruin. That was a dance hall, he said, and we would cycle over, and after the dance there'd be tea and sandwiches until dawn. Another in Isle Moor doubled as a picture house. Its wooden doors sagged now, and iron roof rusted. The one by the Clapper Bridge and the Colony had disappeared. After the nearby church was pulled down, it became a meeting place for the IRA in the Revolution and the War of Independence. There is no sign of music now. The things left behind, the mountains and rivers, tombs like bombs from the 6th century, uneven surface of the bog after turf is taken, stumps of an old forest. The pronunciation of place names best done in Irish, where optimism is in the trochaic emphasis that drips from the tongue. These things, barely a stream of air between teeth and ear, remain as markers of difference. They are hard as rock. 7. Along the Atlantic coast, the wind has a quality I'd never encountered. It is like blocks of dense material being pushed at you off a particularly manic elevator. You can hear the wind coming. You think it's a plane, then you realize this is not a flight path. You think it might be thunder, but the conditions aren't right. You think it might be an army of orcs approaching or a tank squadron, but it's the wind building up across the Atlantic. When you hear it coming, you rush in and shut the door, because when it's arrived, you'll never get it closed. The wind from the west. When the wind comes from the south up the valley, it booms like an aeroplane going through the sound barrier as it bursts out of the valley. When it comes from the north and east, it hammers on the back door. The wind is not like an animal. It is not a snarling beast. It has no focus, but is an abstract force and all-encompassing. It becomes a world. If you leave out your bin without tying it down, you might kill a neighbor. A loose bucket will fly into the sky and smash windows. On the beach, the terns fly into the wind as a gang, and then just hang there, unconcerned. We too lean into the wind, our trousers and our legs. Number 11, or part of number 11. The right wave. The lifted finger from the steering wheel. The full-handed wave with palm extended outwards for a few seconds for the neighbor you know well. The casual wave to an acquaintance or a farmer you pass every day. Many in between. I get it wrong and curse myself. I practice when there are no cars around, waving at imaginary passers-by. It is better to wave too often. Number 13. Land, water, and the vertical and horizontal borders between them. Liminal shores that you can dip a toe into or go knee deep, breaking through a surface of turf. Deep black ditches where the peat water flows. In Mayo, the water might be under the land, a bog that ripples all that walks. Roads are slivers of tarmac. When landlords walked the earth, improving the land was a mug's game. As the widow said to Asenath Nicholson in 1845, if I make my acre tidy, the agent puts £1 on the rent or turns me out. So the land lay unnurtured, fit only for potatoes, the landlord's friend that kept the earth turned, and the peasant strong enough to work, but without the energy to bring revolution. The peasant sustained in the landlord's eyes as the lazy peasant, apparently too feckless to care for their land. And then the final piece from this work, number 17, is to the pig. The pig, of course, was a staple of smallholding life, but often used to pay the landlord, and therefore had a very privileged life. So the revolution might have been good for farmers, but it wasn't necessarily good for pigs. After the revolution, no free state for the pigs who moved from the fireside to the sty, losing their place as payers of rent and providers of crackling to the pig lords. In the revolution, the land went to those who worked it. In the Civil War, the big houses were razed to the ground, and the English press and English history kept mum in case such practices might cross the Irish Sea. Unrest might spread like republicanism. So I'm now going to read 3 poems from the forthcoming book by Aquifer called By Tiny Twisting Ways. It's a book, I suppose, that talks about the relationship between land and the body and disease. And it's a long sequence, and I'll just read some sections from it, 3 sections from it. And this is number 12. Things that never stop, roar of the wind, the shifting of sand, a tumor growing inside itself. Boulders squeak like marbles at the base of the cliff, turning against the tide for the erosion. Fields of boulders radically altered under pressure from deep water changing daily. Pathways blocked to the pure shining skin of sand, untouched by human hand or foot, the crash of their rearrangement. The boulders like fields of the dead, what dark power moves them? As if a cancer growing ragged round the edges could withstand the storm surge of a sea from immeasurable depths. Such force could pop a tumor like a zit, burst the bubble of sickness, invisible force field of an illness around a house like a bathysphere bolted down tight. Against the shifty sea and its false faces, mountains moved by tectonic time. Clouds cross their uplands. Deep inside, they laugh at the sea, its tidal urges tossing up kelp, a whale, unimaginable dead things. How can disease prevail as each wave heads to the shore, as each fresh fall of rain becomes a river of light, as mountains when called upon responded, people shifting sheep from field to field, down from the commonage to the nurtured lands around the house. The hands of shepherds dressed for mass, peace be with you. In the slow turning of the year, cancer must wither and die. We stay in for the storm, for the wind and rain, still and waiting. 14, numbers. Numbers and their deep indifference to context, adding up the same anywhere and any time. promising a relationship unhindered by numerous blockages of atherosclerosis, the quadruple bypass, or mutating cells of cancer. But numbers are never indifferent. 3 can be a trinity or not enough. Numbers are percentages and the odds of recovery. Things count. A number of ones that never become more. The body has 1,000,000,000 cells times 100. A rogue cell mutates 6 times to make cancer, multiplies out of control, disordered. Cells fasten on to any passing number. Mutating cells get together and decide to mess things up. We'll make a tumor, they said, a pile of bad cells, and that way we'll kill the good ones that stay in line. Numbers are never neutral or pure. The 7th wave is often the 8th. Twin peaks of Muiri come and go in the cloud. Black stumps of the petrified forest in Loch Nahaltora are 4,500 years old and too numerous to count. Gods often say there's only me, and they would. Pain has a number, 1 to 10. Effort has a number, 1 to 20. There are 2 islands, Turk and Clare. Places have many names. Rocky faces are skin deep. If faith can move mountains, one cancer will be easy meat. It's manipulation of multiplication, an offense against the beat of the heart, the pressure of blood, and the consistency of the count. And finally, number 21, that sunset trap. The sun melts the sea. At the horizon is a pool of gold that widens as it sets like liquid, a shining path. Silver, then gold again. A ribbon of yellow gold takes the shape of the waves. Light is all legs now, becomes 4 transparent fingers. Light breaks through a bank of cloud, becomes metallic. This communal experience. At the base of the cloud bank, more fiery red, as if a furnace is breaking the surface of slag. Pink rays in military formation follow. Surface begins to break up, tracing lights like a wormery or circuit diagram, only semi-illuminated, while in yellow fading light above, the ribs of a whale make bars, and a cage we can see through. Thank you.
Ah, great. Yeah, really lovely to hear those. Thank you. And right, so yeah, thank you very much, Ian, for wonderful reading there. And we'll move on now to the final reader, Peter Hughes. Peter is also the kind of co I think we're jointly hosting this event, and so Oystercatcher Press is Peter Hughes's life concern. So all of these readers have a pamphlet with Oystercatcher, and so that is something to think about, is buying these pamphlets.
That's a good idea.
And I'm sure, yes, it's a very good idea. And so these are all obtainable from the Oystercatcher website. And I'll put that in the chat in a minute, in case you need a link through to it. Okay, so Peter Hughes lives on the northern margins of Snowdonia, where he runs Oystercatcher Press. He also teaches and has been Judith E. Wilson Visiting Fellow in Poetry at Cambridge University. Shearsman published Peter's selected poems alongside a volume entitled An Intuition of the Particular, some essays on the poetry of Peter Hughes, edited by Ian Brinton. His other poetry publications include distinctive versions of Petrarch, Cavalcanti and Leopardi. And his most recent book is A Berlin Entrainment, from Shearsman 2019. Tonight he's going to be reading from his pamphlet Bethesda Constellations and from 3 current projects. So our final reader, Peter Hughes.
Thank you, Zoe. And thank you for doing all of the work this evening. Never mind co-hosting. So the things that I would like to read are really a celebration of collaboration in various ways. I've been getting to know David Rees's work recently, and we've started to do a little project together, which is partly to do with the fact that Dante's death day is coming up shortly, his 700th. And I'm going to read 3 short poems from to which David will be responding visually, I hope. Halfway through a Leopardi rewrite, David Rees came to me in a vision, manning a mobile karaoke booth that featured sparkling astral projections of one Pan's person after another in the lockdown, lukewarm London night. I nearly spilt my sigh in the abyss in spasm to a Francoise Hardy song, so I knew it was time to reload with Stone's ginger wine and an Aldi Speyside single malt loaf pressed against each ear, then head along the path up through Drachmelin, which certain locals say is not called that. Emerge upon a gorse shelf in the sky. 2. Under the sign of the blue square halo, the river of death jogs on. I think it's in E flat. Most of the air we breathe is memory. A picnic and a swim on Ynys Llandoin, a bit of Polish pork loin from Llandudno. Over a flask of tea we remembered Blake said trees were the imagination. And even in Venice, canticles have never been a breakfast cereal. Like the small penguins of Tasmania, we've undergone a catastrophic molt. We're going home. We're dirty boppers. 3. Talking Heads said she was moving into the universe, moving this way and that, and she was. She was riding an NSU quickly down the Cowley Road at 4 in the morning. She was skating along the Brighton Promenade. She was standing on the ferry across the Mersey. She was changing trains at Gare du Nord. She was boarding Metro A at Anamina. She was catching that San Giovanni tram. She was leaving from Schönefeld Airport. Dave's calling out for his telescopic de Kooning mop, and some of that crunchy nut yellow he sometimes puts in people's eyes. The next poem is from a project that Peter Riley initiated. He heard a blues song by Gishu Wiley, which was recorded in 1930, and it's called Last Kind Words Blues. And Peter wrote a sequence of poems in response to this poem, this song, this blues song, and its strange narratives, which do have to do with, partly to do with the war, actually, the Second World War. Anyway, he invited a bunch of people, including Zoe, to join in, basically. And I wrote this short poem in response to the song and to Peter's work. It's called Poem. This evening is a stunning range of blues from sky to slate and back along the tracks we've had on shuffle through the seasons. This is not our destination, even though it's where we stop between the oak and holly. If I die, say hereabouts, still swallowing the swollen pad of an age-inappropriate sandwich. Bake me clean and brush aside this troubling flesh, then tuck my memories amongst the birch and hazel, a little smudge upon the rain-washed hawthorn, just a dusty benediction on the birch, and hazel, the reese and ash and beech. Yes, let me sleep beneath the blues, beneath the lady of the woods. And that book's out from Shearsman, Last Kind Words. Okay, I'm going to read a poem from Bethesda Constellations, which is part of a collaborative sequence, again, this time with Simon Marsh. So it's my second big collaboration with Simon. This one is called Reload, as in RE:LODE. And this is the 26th of the sequence, and is mostly to do with Simon cooking fishy bits. As you rummage for recalcitrant vongole in a brimming bowl, the muffled underwater clicks and chatter of the clams add fresh percussive highlights and deflections to the deeper musics of the valley and the kitchen, where a lean trio of anchovies and 4 fat cloves of this year's garlic embark upon a new collaboration in the wide expanses of your aluminium pan, whereas in itchy dreams, concocted by mosquitoes and streams of vermentino, I saw you stick a mini octopus on the front of your SG, which served as temporary amp and living strum buddy, but also sang along in wordless, gurgling croons. Such coy and plaintive tunes as could be captured by the engineers at ECM, then blended with the tread and lustre of a battered old acoustic bass in timeless Lombard airs. This little pamphlet, Bethesda Constellations, has 3 poems from a collaboration with Elena Rivera, and we both responded to the 12 piano pieces by Tchaikovsky, which together make up a thing called The Seasons. Should be called The Months, really, because there are 12 of them, each named after a month. So I'm going to read my poems from that sequence. Unlike Tchaikovsky, I start in November. Turning into strangers in the flat above, the clocks go back along the rutted tracks, through forests of the unimagined chestnut music, chrysanthemum dusk at only 25 to homemade pumpkin soup, offerings to convalescent skies, an overpowering smell of more flags burning in the plaza. December. Heavy skies are roosting in the holly and the oak, the tallest and least visible loads are suddenly lit up exactly now, acidic and yet crystalline refractions of the light, through water turning in and out of us and ice with metamorphoses of memory, zoom out from its little cage fighters to non-figurative drips and flickers into pathways trodden by these strange arrivals, carrying the echoes of a party in the distance, becoming fainter as they carry us away. January. The earth-stuffed crust is scorched, and from the top of the revolving restaurant, we're granted glimpses of incinerated foreigners and forests, heaps of tangible marsupials, the softly blackened outlines now dismembered by the winds that, fanned by failure, roar throughout the night. It's written at the time of the terrifying fires in Australia. February. Here's another unelected twilight, granular as in an old Italian volume, roosting in the clock with one hand shadowed by the other. Wing is crudely carved as if by orphans, emulating other people's parents, making simple spoons with grandma's hatchet and an elbow of storm birch. the transformed green wood drying on the porch, where it has now turned dark. We know the feeling. March. A longer evening light begins to play across the damp catchments of the valley and these eyelash fractals of resistance. The king is in his armoured counting house and has proclaimed that fire should be allowed free rein to ransack woods and villages so as to reinforce the Commonwealth's immunity to future conflagration. The slightly longer evening light plays on around our temporary clearing. A hint of fresh petal on the blackthorn and a pair of long-tailed tits are building. So that was a year ago. Last April. So everyone's backing up and burying their cheeses. Some nights it's harder to decide. Die behind a skip or dance in front of thousands to Tchaikovsky. May. The instrument communicates across the years of light, the years of darkness, Hubble ultra deep field images, ways the past remains remote and palpable, implacable and hard to calculate. These musics or the modulus of rupture for the self, the neighbours and the state. June. Giovanni Bellini reflections ripple through the surfaces of autumn in an empty wooden frame. Duck through a hole in the wall and follow the course of the stream uphill as far as the lake. Watermarks through consciousness, eradicated olive trees, eradicated settlements. La Madonna dell'Orto, open now, closes 5:30. July. I thought I heard Hart Crane murmur in the mind's sound through wires that modulated to the ghost of a mazurka in a lost line of Jack Spicer, or the insides of a broken radio in an empty Welsh hotel room, or the song of someone else's lost companion and the ashes of forgotten gods sift downwards through the twisted frames of pines and limes and carbonized imagined architecture. To paraphrase the thinking witch's rumble strip glistening opposite plus waves, and cats nearly noiselessly steering through one fence, then another, across these moonlit gaps in cloud. Over hills to the east, the stars are haunting 3 uninhabited planets, boots on gravel, and the death of freedom. August. Storms have rinsed the trees. The virus is discouraging some tourists in the middle of the woods. There is no middle of the woods, just an underlying conversation joining all these species, like a tawny owl, sat slowly owling. Thoughts of tree and tree slowly grow over half a dozen centuries. More seconds pass and I must remember bread, while early evening is creating bark rubbings of consequent sounds in floaters in this translucent halo, posterior vitreous detachment. An unmanned track goes on ascending to the first or last of the Carneddau, descending to the river. Excuse me, I had a tickly throat. September. We followed Ellen of the Ways into September with the hunt rampaging in our heads, the line of fire advancing through the forest. We thought about what happens to the rain, the spore and languages, the individual notes, migratory and tidal, exceptional and accidental, phonemes lodged in feathers, the vowel endowed The stranded scraps accumulate and nest around the drowned. And finally, October. What about, I don't know, maybe Slow Motion Blackbird by Chris Hughes to go along with the Tchaikovsky? As the rain is softly falling in the radio and over all these mountains, woods and buildings, people's lives uneasily coexisting with the branded news receptors, another acorn knocks on this thin cabin roof. The autumn oak leaves wonder when to fall. But this is where I make a brand new start. I'm calling it The Modulus of Rupture, a book of poems that might not see the light of day. But it's good to have a project that doesn't fuck up an entire country, or world if you include the run-up. Well, it's true that a lot of dreams these days feel pretty tame compared to modern film or politics and news of yet another death. Les says they used to make the coffins out of elm as it was more hospitable to bugs and fungi, and so settled into other modes of life sooner than some of us expected. This wet day began again with an exemplary blackbird song, and this is just a temporary break. Thank you.
Oh.
If any of you are interested, that Chris Hughes Blackbird thing is a great piece of music. Chris recorded the song of a blackbird and then basically used that melody to generate his own melodies and harmonize with them and then transform. It's good stuff.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, yeah, all three really fantastic, and yeah, great.
So as Zoe said, do check out the renewed Oystercatcher website. Books are all arranged by year now, so you can see, step back through time to 2008 and sample its wares.
Mm-hmm. It was so great hearing, like, just sort of thinking about those poems geographically, so sort of between Wales and Ireland, and yeah, and I was thinking there was really some really interesting lines connecting them, and like there was the bog in Ian and Ellen, and then Peter, you didn't have any bogs in yours, but you did have buried cheese that made it kind of rhyme with the buried butter. Like, so, and it was very interesting. And Peter, your poems are kind of more about, there was more water than bog, in Ian's and Ellen's there was this kind of bog resurfacing in ground, and it was very, I was thinking, I was wondering what was going, yeah, whether you also noticed those kind of connections in landscape when you were reading. Did you?
The three of us composed this evening's reading very much as a symphony, didn't you guys?
Psychically, yeah.
Yeah. So well spotted.
I was really interested to hear Peter talking about, I mean, because it's areas that I know well. I mean, I know Bethesda kind of really well, so it's really interesting to hear about someone else going there at the same time as I'm in a place that I'm trying to kind of read as well, with many of the same delights and difficulties, I suppose. And of course, Ellen will know much more about the area that I'm in than I do now, and therefore will, there's a different kind of hearing about that too.
Yeah,
I particularly loved your mention of the taxonomy of waving, like in the different levels of enthusiasm you have to show when you wave at different people. That is such, like, I've lived here my entire life and I still get it wrong sometimes, and like people get offended if you don't wave at them in the right way with the right number of fingers and the right level of enthusiasm. It's very cryptic.
That's the anyway. Never mind. It's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Explain that's really what?
Sorry?
What is the taxonomy of waving?
Well,
Like there's a certain level of enthusiasm. Like you have to give a full-handed wave to somebody that's a close neighbor of yours, even if your head is not. If you're thinking about other things, you have to give them, the fullness of your attention in your salute. Otherwise, it's frowned upon.
Yeah.
But there's also, of course, there's also just the lifted finger off the steering wheel, which is kind
One
of like,
finger, yeah, 2 fingers, 3 fingers. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Zoe, do you think this might be a good time to unmute people if they
have
want?
we muted them?
Well, I think some people look as though they're muted.
Hang on, let me
Is that
see.
what the little red figures mean?
People were. No, I don't think they are.
Oh,
I think
okay.
we just do ourselves.
I think you can unmute. I think.
Oh, all right then.
So I don't think there's any. But yes, I mean, we're not in any hurry. So if anybody has anything to add or ask, then yeah.
I'm just fascinated about this waving business, and I moved to Ceredigion 4 years ago, and I'm wondering if this is what I'm getting wrong. But I find the sort of traditions of place fascinating, and the waving I've never come across. I think that's really great. That's all I've got to say.
I think of the waving thing is very much connected with driving around these narrow country lanes where I am, and about giving way and how obvious or not it is that you should give way, So if it's not at all obvious and you give way, you get a bigger way.
Well, in Ceredigion, basically, if you haven't got a local number plate, you just get driven at.
Oh, really?
I live on 2 miles up on a single track road and then a track, and it is basically if they don't know you, you're invisible. It's quite scary but good fun at the same time if you like games of Risk. I may have to write a poem about it.
Yeah, I think you should.
Ellen, I was very interested in the poems with the French. Yeah, can you?
Yeah.
Out and yeah, I mean, you said a little bit about it, but yeah.
So the poems all started with the individual grammar lessons. So there's like a big book of proverbs behind me here someplace that Mallarmé scavenged through and picked some of the proverbs and repackaged them as grammar lessons. So he translated them all into French for his students to translate them back into English as a way of automatically learning various grammatical structures. So like there's 100 of them. They start with indefinite articles and they go through all sorts of permutations. And I was going to do the whole 100 of them, but out of pity for everybody, including myself, I didn't. So when I started writing them, I was just doing found poems from each versions, from the English and the French. So they were just kind of parallel to each other because it was pretty much the same text in the 2 languages. And then I rewrote them. And when I rewrote them, they went off in different directions. So the English ones kind of took on their associations and the French ones took on their own different associations. So they start off, it's like kind of like a Venn diagram. So they start off with the same source material pretty much in the middle, and then they kind of wander off. So so I've never written anything sustained in French before, so it was an interesting exercise.
It's great to hear it, and and I look forward to it. Yeah, it sounds really.
Yeah, I know it's coming out in June, so I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. Wow. And Yeah, I mean, who are your kind of points of reference in contemporary French poetry, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't, I shouldn't say this, but I don't read an awful lot of contemporary French poetry. Like, I read a lot of contemporary poetry in English, but
Yeah.
my knowledge of French poetry in French isn't that contemporary. Like, I mean, oh, you know, it'd be more like Emmanuel Aucard and Marie Aviac, and like maybe the previous generation more so than anybody that contemporary.
Yeah.
I need to maybe tune in a bit more to what's happening now in France as opposed to a generation ago.
Yeah. No, it sounds really, really interesting. Yeah, I will look forward to reading it. Yeah. Oh, cool. And
Can I ask Ian to remind us about his when his next thing is coming out? Is it Aquifer?
Yeah, so
Aquifer?
yeah, so the next thing is coming out with Aquifer. I think I don't know what Lyndon was here. Lyndon is still here, so I think it's in a few weeks. And that's 2 long sequences, which I read from the first one, and then there's a second sequence as well. Both are written, I mean, in some ways they speak to and speak with the material that's in From a Council House in Connacht. So they're kind of, you know, if I wanted to be fanciful about it, I could say they were part of the same project or something, you know, but they have some of the same, they have some of the same perspectives, or some of the same, they're concerned with some of the same issues, really, with some major differences as well. Yeah, so really pleased about that coming out. Looking forward to it being available. Yeah,
it'll be about 2 weeks, something like that, I think.
Okay, oh, that's great. Oh, well.
Hopefully.
Excellent.
I think it's still kind of part of the pact that I made. Really, I made a pact to kind of and as I say, I can't remember what the terms of the pact were, so I can't remember what I promised that I would do. So I just have to keep doing these things, like writing poems, like mending fences, like digging the earth, and just in order to try and fulfil the terms of a pact that I made with a place that I can't kind of remember the terms of. But I know that if I get it wrong, it's kind of going to be disastrous. So I have to try and keep doing all these different things to try and get it right.
And is that a lifetime's work now?
Yeah. I think the thing I regret now is that I didn't, at an earlier age, that I didn't just get a piece of land and just kind of live on it, you know. And I think that's, it sounds kind of romantic in some ways, but that seems to me a kind of good thing, a noble pursuit, good thing to do, and just to see it keep kind of changing and keep being different. Land, the great thing about land, of course, is it's completely unreliable. You never quite know what it's going to do from year to year, and it'll send up different things that behave in different ways. So that's yeah. And I suppose it's also trying to. Sorry, I'll shut up in a minute. But it's also in a way trying to reclaim some kind of notion of, the kind of notion of. There's a very obviously a fascist notion of land and soil and all that kind of thing, and it's trying to kind of, in some ways, talk around or through or with that kind of fascist ideology, which equates a certain sense of belonging with land, and trying to work differently with that.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I mean, that was kind of what I was kind of thinking about when you were reading. So, and like Ellen was talking about the bog as this sort of place of transformation and sort of dark buried things, and then there's a different kind of relationship to soil in what you're doing as a worked thing, as a surface. It's
yeah, but the bog is also a place of work, of course, as Ellen well knows, and anyone else here from Ireland knows, that they're places of activity where turf has been taken for
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're also kind of worked landscapes. But also I'm particularly interested in kind of very marginal land where actually soil is not necessarily there, you know, it's kind of quite precious, you know. So it's not as if you're kind of planting your not planting your crops into kind of 3 feet of topsoil, you know, it's actually often very, very thin or marginal. So I'm interested in that, in that idea of marginal land. Yeah.
We've had some of that today up in the allotment in
Yeah.
which is very stony. So for the last 2 years, we've been putting lots of donkey muck in and excavating lots of stones and making it really rich. And then we left it for a while and we've gone back. And it's as if like a foot of soil has gone and all we're left with is stones again. And because we're on a mountainside and it's that journey, that living with the land and that sort of feeding it and that feed, you know, it's wonderful. No bogs, it's just draining off.
That's good.
Great readings, really, really great. Thank you, guys.
Mhm. Great. Oh.
It's an allotment with a wonderful set of views, but not super productive. Maybe this year.
It's the journey, not the, you know.
Not the vegetables.
Maybe this is the time to announce that Lyndon and I, having read so much allotment poetry over the last year, we're thinking of maybe putting together an allotment anthology.
Wow.
At some point. Would anybody out there be interested?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Good. Glad to hear it. Is Harriet there? I think she has an allotment too.
That's a bit unfair for everybody who hasn't got an allotment, though.
Well, I know. And Anthony,
I used to have one and I had it taken off me.
Yeah. Well, Anthony
Right
Mells,
about that.
another poet of our acquaintance, has complained about being an allotment widow. So this allotment poetry type banter has been going on. So there we go. Maybe you could kind of bond or pair with a poet who has an allotment and sort of ride.
I loved my allotment. It was. Yes.
No one
anyway,
needs
less about.
A window box will do, actually.
Oh, I grow, but I haven't got an allotment. Different thing. So, I think the relationship with land and the writing of the poetry and in all of the poems read today, I really liked that sort of working land. It wasn't sort of this observation of land. It was sort of, you know, getting your hands in the land or this relationship with land, which is quite different. And I really like that. And the allotment poetry, I assume, would be in the same vein, that, you know, it's being with the land and using the land.
Yeah, and it's often
hands dirty.
It's a temporary relationship as well. That's part of the deal. So you don't get the danger of that blood and essentialism thing, which was what I liked about the way that the poets today were, you know, talking about land. That wasn't there. That wasn't a danger. You know, Peter was burying a cheese, but he wasn't doing it in the way that Seamus Heaney buries his butter or finds things in the bog. I don't think there's a difference there. So maybe this kind of, there's almost a municipal aspect to allotments, isn't there? So maybe it ties in with what Ian was saying, you know, about a council house in the west of Ireland. It's sort of very specific in the title, isn't it? It's something that is almost like a communal possession, and you have for a while, and then it goes to someone else, and that's part of the meaning of working that land or living in that house, as it were.
And that might be part of why allotments have never taken off in Ireland in the same way as they have in the UK, because there is always something like land is never just land. It's never just where you grow your spuds, and like that. There's, you know, there's still so much fetishizing of, you know, attachments to particular tracts of land and family links to things that, you know, maybe makes it harder than it should be for people to relinquish some of that ownership and you know, that kind of communal culture that an allotment would entail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I suppose the council house bit just came because I mean that's what we were told it was. That's what we were told it was when we came here, and it was they were. It's a row of three, and it's what's called, well, people refer to it as a cottage in an acre. It was built post-revolution, 1930s, 1940s, and it was for the people who didn't get any land when the land was divided up after the revolution. So that you might have got this cottage in an acre if you didn't have any land. So it's for the landless.
So yeah, but I mean that's a good space to have, and for your chickens and goats.
I thought it was low. Yeah, I thought it was. Oh, yes. I mean, yes. I mean, it depends where you're looking from. I think, in terms of how big you think it is. But yeah. It's one can do a lot with it, and I'm very interested in what one can do with it.
Yeah. And not everybody would have seen your goats artwork.
On Facebook.
Maybe not, but
the book. So, you really want me to do this, Zoe? I can do this. I'll do this. This is. Can you? This is.
I can see it fine. Yeah.
You can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this is a copy that we fed to the goats. And they got to page 12. And then gave up. Actually, I thought it was quite an easy read, this pamphlet, but the goats thought page 12 was as far as they wanted to go. That's that. So Peter, if you want to know what I'm doing with these copies that you're sending out to Ireland, then this is what happens to them.
Is that the first review copy then, really?
Yeah. I can't do a goat sound, but I would if I could.
That's great. Yeah.
There is film of that on social media if you want to seek it out.
Did the eggshells and the thistles get more interesting after page 12, Ian, or did you distract them in some other way?
Oh, with the goat, I don't know what happened. I think they didn't really seem. I mean, they were enthusiastic to start with, but yeah. I think they really didn't like the taste very much. Actually, I think there was something that Oystercatcher uses in the paper, which is kind of, and it's like it stops goats from eating too many of them.
It wasn't some technical term from Gaelic then that sort of threw them. Nothing like that.
No, I don't think. No, they're quite good. They're quite good at technical terms, but I think it was just to do with
the wrong wave.
Sorry?
Was it the wrong wave?
Maybe I defended them in some way. Yeah, it's very tricky.
You're muted. I think you should have spread a bit of bog butter on it, Ian.
Well, I think probably I realise that was my error.
That's it. Tallow goodness.
Well, I think
So,
I think this is probably a good time to say thank you very much to a whole bunch of people. Thank you to Ellen and to Ian for reading this evening. I'm going to say thanks to Steve Zerry again, who's been so helpful, such an important part of Oystercatcher in the last few months with the cover design and with typesetting as well.
Pleasure.
And many thanks to Zoe for her Zooming expertise. So thank you again for doing far too much, Zoe.
Pleasure. I really enjoyed it. All three. Thank you very much. Excellent readings. I think we'd have another round of applause. And
yeah.
Great. And okay. So should we end it there?
Okay.